The scripture reading today is taken from Joshua chapter 2, verses 1 through 14. If you care to look that up in your Bible, follow along. It'll be 14 verses. Then Joshua, the son of Nun, sent 2 men as spies secretly from Shittim, saying, "Go view the land, especially Jericho." So they went and came into the house of a harlot, whose name was Rahab, and lodged there. And it was told the king of Jericho, saying, "Behold, men from the sons of Israel have come here tonight to search out the land." And the king of Jericho sent word to Rahab, saying, "Bring out the men who have come to you, who have entered your house, for they have come to search out all the land." But the woman had taken the 2 men and hidden them, and she said, "Yes, the men came to see me, but I did not know where they were from. And it came about when it was time to shut the gate at dark that the men went out. I do not know where the men went. Pursue them quickly, for you will overtake them." But she had brought them up to the roof and hidden them in the stalks of flax, which she had laid in order on the roof. So the men pursued them on the road to the Jordan, to the fords. And as soon as those who were pursuing them had gone out, they shut the gate. Now before they lay down, she came up to them on the roof and said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you the land, and that the terror of you has fallen on us, and that all the inhabitants of the land have melted away before you. For we have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea before you when you came out of Egypt, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites who were beyond the Jordan, to Sihon and Og, whom you utterly destroyed. And when we heard it, our hearts melted, and no courage remained in any man any longer because of you, for the Lord your God. He is God in heaven above and on earth beneath. Now therefore, please swear to me by the Lord, since I have dealt kindly with you, that you also will deal kindly with my father's household, and give me a pledge of truth, and spare my father and my mother and my brothers and my sisters with all who belong to them, and deliver our lives from death." So the men said to her, "Our life for yours, if you do not tell this business of ours. And it shall come about when the Lord gives us the land that we will deal kindly and faithfully with you."
As I've been thinking about this series of sermons this week, it's come to my attention that it could appear like I'm picking on women, because a lot of these people we're talking about are not the cream of society. They're not the top-notch people that we usually picture as would have had been in the line of a king to come. Especially the first 4 women that we're talking about, and even more than that, the first 3, depending on how you want to attempt or interpret the actions of the 4th, as whether she is totally innocent, or if she has a part in what happened in her story. But I'd remind you that as we're looking at some of these women of Christ's lineage, if we did a study of the same thing, type of study of men in Christ's lineage, you're going to find the same thing with them. Because basically every one of us is a flawed individual. One of the people in Christ's lineage, of course, is King David. And King David's sin was so great when it was all said and done that he was not allowed to build a temple, even though he wanted to. So as we come to this next woman that we're going to talk about today, Rahab, you've probably already figured that out, or you should have by now, that her sin is not much different than Tamar in some respects, even though it was multiplied probably in the extent that it went. Where Tamar played a temple prostitute one time, Rahab was a prostitute. And there's no nice way to say that. In those days, there were two types of prostitutes. There were the temple prostitutes who for pagan religions, and that's basically what Tamar, the part she was playing. Or there were prostitutes who, like today's prostitutes, just do it for the money. That was her profession. That's how she made her living. But we don't want to just look at these people's sin, because if that's all we look at when we see their lives, then we aren't any better than they are. We need to look at what happened in their lives, or as Paul Harvey used to say, the rest of the story. Because that's important, especially when we look at Rahab. Their lives have tremendous lessons for us that we can gain from. So let's just run over Rahab's story real quick. The children of Israel have come out of Egypt. They've wandered in the wilderness for 40 years, and now they're positioned at Shittim, which is just to the east side of the Jordan River, ready to travel west back across the river. And while they are there, by the way, God has given them some instructions. He told them when they go into the land, they're to destroy everybody. Now, does that sound nice to you, that God would tell somebody to do that? But you have to realize that these people were the same type of people probably that were destroyed in the flood. They had no religion or anything else, and they were a very perverted people, and God knew that if he left them in the land that they would taint his people. And he had also promised them a complete victory over the people of the land if they followed his instructions completely and lived by what he had told them in the laws. So as they stand there on the banks of the Jordan River, they send two spies. Now, we're not told their name, but I'll give you the speculation on one of them later, who they think his name was. It's not fact, it's just speculation. But they were to check out Jericho and the surrounding areas. You know, like any good general, he's doing a surveillance of the land to see what they're going to face as they go into the land. And they were sent to find out the strength of the people, things like that. And as they came into the city of Jericho, the first place they went was to a house of prostitution. Does that sound like a very good example they were setting? Or what were they after? Why did they go there? I think probably when you stop and think about it, it was an easy place to mingle, an easy place to sit down and listen to people as they were waiting in line and to learn what they could, to become lost in the crowds of other people and other men who were visiting the city. It's quite possible they had seen Rahab on the street and had followed her home under God's direction. We don't know, but that's where they were found. Now, this house was built on the walls or within the walls. A lot of times, that's where some of the poor groups of people would live. In the walls, you see, they would have, like Jericho had two walls, an outer wall and an inner wall. They were usually separated about 15, 20 feet. But if you build within those walls, you already have two walls of your home built. So it was a lot cheaper. And they sometimes build in layers. And sometimes between the two walls, there was a wooden or a earthen berm, and the houses would be raised up because they would be built towards the top of where the walls were. And apparently that's where Rahab's house was situated. Now before we go any further, let's think a little bit about the inhabitants of Jericho. Across the river, almost on their doorstep, camped millions of people with a huge army. That army had devastated people that arose against them on the west side or the east side of the Jordan River. Is it any wonder that when the king heard that it was reported to him that spies had entered from that place into Jerusalem or into Jericho, is it any wonder that he wanted to get a hold of them, search them out, find them? and take care of them. And the rumor was they were at Rahab's house. She admitted the two men had been there, but she said she didn't know where they were from. By the way, not only is Rahab a harlot, she is also a very glib liar when you stop and think about it. She said the men left before the gates were closed. And she says, run, hurry, and you may catch them before they can get back to the Jordan River and cross. In the meantime, she hid them under the stalks of flax laid on the roof. You ever wonder about that? When flax was harvested in the fall, they would take and soak those flax stalks for 3 to 4 weeks, because that would ruin the stalk, and all they would be left with was the fiber pretty much. It separated the fibers, and then they would take on the roofs of the houses and lay those fibers all out so they would dry in the sun. And so that's probably what they were laying under, was this covering of stalk fiber. And by the way, they took the fiber of stalks and then made linen out of it. That's what it was used for. And so that's where she hid them, where all the flax was laid out on the roof of her house, drying, in a place where probably people are not going to look and see if there's somebody hidden there. But as Rahab interacts with the people, she makes a great confession. She says, I know Yahweh has given you the land. Our people are living in terror because they know that too. We know he dried up the Red Sea before the children of Israel, how they had utterly destroyed the Amorites and the kings that were on that east side of the Jordan. I always get that mixed up. I don't want to turn east and west around in Jerusalem when I'm looking at it. But she understood that. Now, how did she know that? Well, word of mouth travels, just like it does today over the internet. Somebody says something, and before long, it's all over the internet. And you can't trust 90% of what you hear. Just this morning, I was noticing on the news that at Trump's rally, he bragged about how he was filled the thing to over capacity, and one of the Washington Post reporters then posted a picture on Twitter and said, no, it didn't fill the stadium capacity. Look at what the stadium, it's half empty. Well, they took the picture 2 hours before the rally began, when all the crowd was still outside and hadn't come in yet. And of course, they got called out for it, and he's already had to apologize. But you can't always believe everything you hear. But yet, she had heard the stories about Yahweh. She had heard how God had been with this nation that was traveling millions of people through a desert for 40 years, and yet survived. And she began to realize that there was more to their God than there were to her gods. And her confession was this: for Yahweh, your God, he is God in heaven above and in earth below. What a wonderful expression of faith that she had. She didn't have any great training, but she could see and understand what was happening. And yet, she isn't what she should be. She's still a prostitute. She could still lie at the drop of a hat. But what we need to understand when we think about Rahab is that when we confess our faith like she did, it's just the beginning. It was the beginning of her life as a different person in reality. If you stop and think about can't think of his name now, John Newton, who wrote Amazing Grace, when he wrote that song, he was still a slaver involved in the slave trade. It was several years later that he finally got out of the slave trade, when he began to grow and realize that wasn't right what he was doing. And we need to realize that Rahab is standing on the beginning of her faith and devotion to God. And apparently, from what we know about Rahab, it grew from that point. It didn't stop and stagnate. And that's a basic good lesson for us today. When we live our faith journeys, when we begin them, we are babes in Christ, the Bible says. And there's two ways we can go. We can grow daily, or we can revert to old paths, habits, friends, and let our faith languish. You can go one of two ways. You never stand stagnant as a Christian. Because if you're standing stagnant as a Christian, you in reality are going backwards. The results, well, Rahab for her service asked that her and her father's family would be saved. The men promised that if she didn't reveal them to the king, when they received the land, they would be faithful to her request. And she told them, she says, now, I'm going to let you down on a rope, and you need to go across city walls. And she says, you need to go to the hill country and hide yourselves for 3 days. Don't head directly for the Jordan or you're going to get caught. Go to the hill country and hide there for 3 days, and by then they will have pulled the troops back, the men back, and then you'll be able to safely go your way. And then she let them down. And the men, as they are parting, says, we will be free of our oath unless you perform the actions that we have asked you to do. If we're caught, of course, we aren't going to live up to our oath because we probably won't be around. But they tell, gather all your family to your house. If they go out of the house after they're in there, then their blood will be on their own head. And then he told him to tie a cord of scarlet thread in the window where you let us down. Now, does that remind you of anything? When the children of Israel left the promised land, the blood was set around the doorpost. And now they're telling her to use a scarlet thread, which probably represents that same blood, tie it on the window, and that will make those in the house safe when we come back. Basically, that scarlet stands in both instances as you look forward to the blood of Jesus Christ will eventually cover everyone's sin. Instead of death, we get life through Jesus' blood. And this is the ultimate result of God's giving of his Son, that gift so long ago, that our sins could be covered. And yet if we walk out from under that covering, if we walk away from that narrow path that is described in the Bible, then death is the result. They hid in the hills for 3 days, and then they returned to report. And the report to Joshua, was the children of Canaan are melting before our very eyes. They're scared to death. We can take them. And so if you go on, oh, I'm way behind. No, let's go back then. Talk about the fall of Jericho. That's in Joshua 6 if you wanted to follow along in it. It takes a few chapters to get to the end of the story, but most of us know it. The army marches around the city every day for 6 days. And I'm sure that was a frightening sight. And I also have a feeling it was a frightening feeling, simply from the fact, if you're marching in unison, that many people around that city, the ground's going to be shaking a little bit. Anybody that's ever run an earth compactor, you know how much that'll shake the ground. It'll, even if they're running outside your house, shake your house. And I can imagine that many people coming down in unison was just like an earth compactor around that city. And I have a feeling that's partly, I don't know, but I have a feeling the effect of that on the city probably shook the ground around the city, perhaps making it unstable. That may be why Jericho fell when it did. 7 priests were to carry 7 trumpets of ram's horn marching before the ark. On the 7th day, they will march around the city 7 times quietly, remain silent until Joshua tells them to shout. And when they all shouted then at the command, when they blew the trumpets, the ones carrying or that were going with the ark, the walls came fumbling down. It fell flat. And I've always wondered when I read that description what Rahab's house looked like. Was there one little section of wall standing, still left? We don't know, but you wonder if that could be true. But we do know her and her family were all saved as promised. Joshua sent in 2 spies to bring them out safely. And this is what is said of Rahab after this happened. It gives us an insight into her future life. It said, and she lived in the midst of Israel to this day. So Rahab basically became a part of the Israelite nation to this very day. And because of what we're preaching on, you know that she became one of the women who was one of the people in Jesus' lineage, his line. Now, I want us to think a little bit today about Rahab. You know, in the present time, when Jesus has prophesied that in these latter days that there would be little faith left on the earth, we realize that she was facing the end times too for Jericho. And yet her faith was strong. And that's what saved her. And it's the same for us in these latter days. Our faith needs to be strong. So much so, do you know that she is one of only 2 women that are mentioned in the faith chapter? There are 2 women mentioned in the faith chapter in Hebrews 11, and in 30 and 31, we read this. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell down after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the harlot did not perish along with those who were disobedient after she had welcomed the spies in peace. Her faith was so strong and courageous that she earned a spot on the honor roll of faith. And I think that says a lot for what became of Rahab because of her faith and the beginning that she had. In James, you also read about Rahab. James says this, and the scripture was fulfilled, which says, and Abraham believed God, and it was reckoned to him for righteousness. And he was called a friend of God. You see that a man is justified by works, and not faith alone. And in the same way was not Rahab the harlot also justified by works when she received the messengers and sent them out another way. I think it's interesting. There's a couple things that strike me as I read these passages. First of all, every time Rahab is mentioned in the New Testament, she's mentioned as a harlot or a prostitute. Why do you think God did that when she's also listed in the list of faithful? She's listed as a prostitute, a harlot. I think it is done as a testimony to the saving power of faith working in our lives. The saving power of coming to really know the Lord. We're taking what she was, labeling her with that, but she was really labeled as faithful too. And that's the part that's really important. What became of her after her beginning in her rough life? And I think it's interesting to know that if a prostitute could come to know the Lord and become faithful to him, not through the teaching of others, but simply by observing how God was working in the nation of Israel, how much more faith should we have than Rahab? Because we have such a better base than she did. Notice this also, that her actions are what illustrated her faith. What she did showed the faith that she had. You know, she could have very easily been killed by the king of Jericho for not giving her the two men if he thought those spies were still there and she had a part in letting them go. You know, we can claim whatever we want. We can even call it faith. But it's really what we do with our lives that reveal our faith in God. I think one of the things that we learn from Rahab is the past does not determine the future. You know, several times over the years, I've had people tell me, I can't become a Christian because I am so wicked that nobody could ever want me. And you never convince them, by the way, or I've never been able to convince them that that isn't true. My response sometimes has been, have you ever killed a man just so you could have his wife? That's pretty wicked in my way of thinking. Have you ever persecuted Jesus' people like Paul did? You know, in Jesus Christ, we can leave all that behind. By faith, Rahab was able to leave her life of prostitution behind and become a valued member of Israel's society and the forerunner of our Lord Jesus Christ. Some people believe that Rahab, well, we know that Rahab married Salmon. And some people believe that Salmon was one of the two spies. That he had seen Rahab in action. Now, it's just speculation, but it proves that someone in Israel saw Rahab, and the light was totally different than the life she had lived in Jericho. We do know she was loved by somebody. We do know she had a son, and we know her son's name was Boaz. We're going to talk about him a little bit next week. But one of the other things that we learn about Rahab is that she loved her family. You know, I wonder how her family treated her. It must have been difficult, for example, to have a prostitute for a daughter. And yet her love for him was so great that he, along with the rest of her family, were brought into her house for about a week, and they were saved by their daughter's faith. She loved her family. We don't know what happened to them after that, whether they came to recognize the God of Israel or not, or whether they even thanked her or not. But I think that her devotion to her family is commendable. Some have suggested that Salmon was one of the spies, as I said, and it's no wonder he would have wanted a generous, unselfish woman like he saw in her to be the mother of his children. I think it only makes sense that when you see somebody that's that dedicated and has put their past behind them, that you know there is something better in the future. In 1 Timothy 5 and verse 8, we're told this: "But if anyone does not provide for his own, and especially for those of his household, he has denied the faith and is worse than an unbeliever." Rahab didn't deny the faith. In fact, she lived the faith by saving her family. She cared about them that much. And I think, again, this is an important part of putting our faith into action. You know, sometimes it can be a struggle to take care of the immediate needs of our family, but each one of us here do our very best to see our children have what they need to survive day by day. And that is commendable. But I sometimes wonder if that same care and providing for our children and our families includes preparing them for the kingdom of God. Because that is just as important as the other part. Leading them to righteous living, to modeling it by our own lives. So as we think about Rahab the prostitute, we find that that does not begin to adequately describe this remarkable woman of faith. A woman of intelligence who had observed the nation of Israel and wanted to know the God that led them. You know, if an honor roll of faith was written today, would we make the grade? Rahab the harlot made the grade. She's mentioned as one of the faithful in Hebrews. If we wrote that same honor of faith today, would we make the grade? Would we be on it? Well, the fact is, there is a book in heaven that is the honor roll of the faithful. It's called the Book of Life. And our question for all of us today comes from an old hymn which simply asks, is your name written there?